We are accustomed to viewing ourselves as the undisputed masters of our own immediate actions, navigating the stream of daily life with the firm conviction that our choices originate within the conscious mind. When you reach for a glass of water, step off a curb, or type a word upon a page, you feel a seamless, instantaneous connection between the thought that commands and the muscle that obeys. Modern neuroscience, however, has pulled back the curtain on this domestic illusion, revealing a quiet, deeply unsettling anomaly hidden deep within our cognitive architecture. Laboratory experiments tracking neurological activity have consistently demonstrated that before you ever become consciously aware of a decision you are about to make, your biological brain has already fired the necessary signals, charting the course of action several seconds in advance. To the purely materialist observer, this discovery sounds like a death knell for human agency, implying that we are merely complex, pre-programmed biological automatons dancing to the deterministic strings of neurochemistry. But if we dare to look beyond the cold instrumentation of the laboratory and view this phenomenons through an esoteric lens, a far more magnificent architecture reveals itself. What science identifies as a mechanical head start is actually a profound metaphysical buffer zone, a mysterious 2-second gap between your brain's evolutionary decision and your soul's sovereign permission. To understand this temporal buffer is to recognize that the human entity is a complex, multi-layered vehicle operating across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Your physical brain is an exquisitely tuned organic computer, a dense processing hub designed to manage the heavy, immediate demands of the material plane. It is deeply wired into the matrix of survival, conditioned by millions of years of evolutionary history, ancestral memory, and environmental programming. It calculates trajectories, anticipates threats, and generates impulses with a lightning-fast, algorithmic efficiency. Left to its own devices, this biological apparatus reacts to life with a predictable, mechanistic inertia, responding to hunger with consumption, to fear with aggression, and to novelty with curiosity. When neuroscience observes the brain, making a decision before the conscious mind registers it, they are witnessing the machine warming up its engines, preparing a physical response to the constant influx of worldly data. The brain is attempting to execute its programming, constructing a proposed reality based entirely on what it has been taught to expect from the past. Yet, this automatic generation of intent is not the final word in human destiny. Hanging just above this frantic neural activity, operating in a state of timeless, luminous equilibrium, is the soul. The soul does not function within the frantic, linear ticks of the biological clock. It is an emissary of the eternal, an expansive field of non-local consciousness that inhabits the physical body without being defined by its limitations. Between the moment the physical brain prepares its automated choice and the moment that choice hardens into physical action, there exists an invisible, sacred interval. This 2-second window is a cosmic checkpoint, a brief hesitation in the fabric of personal time, where the soul is offered the opportunity to review, validate, or veto the evolutionary impulse of the animal vessel. It is a moment of profound spiritual bureaucracy, where the raw data of nature must seek the royal assent of spirit. Without this grace period, human beings would be nothing more than sophisticated beasts, utterly helpless against the currents of instinct and conditioning. The gap is the literal birthplace of free will, a temporary sanctuary where we are permitted to break the chains of cause and effect and introduce a genuine spark of divinity into the material matrix. When we begin to look at our lives through the lens of this hidden interval, the mundane experience of time loses its rigid, forward-marching terror. We realize that we are not being dragged helplessly through a sequence of predetermined events, but are instead living in a perpetual state of negotiation. Every urge, every sudden spike of anger, every habitual craving, and every conditioned reaction is merely a proposal submitted by the biological brain. The brain knocks on the door of consciousness, holding out its automated decision like a servant presenting a letter on a silver platter. For 2 full seconds, that proposal hangs suspended in a metaphysical vacuum, waiting for the master of the house to break the seal. In this brief pause, you are neither your biology nor your past conditioning. You are the silent, observing witness who holds the power of absolute refusal. If you remain asleep, trapped in the mechanical rhythms of modern life, your conscious mind simply rubber stamps the brain's proposal without looking, mistaking the animal impulse for an act of personal volition. But if you awaken to the existence of the gap, you reclaim the power to look at the platter, read the letter, and quietly choose to throw it away. This realization infuses the simple act of living with an immediate, mythic weight. The battle for spiritual liberation is no longer an abstract, cosmic conflict fought in distant heavens or achieved only after decades of ascetic meditation. It is an intimate, localized guerrilla war, fought within the boundaries of every single heartbeat. Every 2 seconds, the universe offers you a clean slate, a microscopic portal through which you can exit the predictable trajectory of your personal history and step into an entirely new timeline. The person you were a moment ago, with all their mistakes, traumas, and limitations, cannot dictate the next frame of your reality unless your soul explicitly grants permission during the current interval. The gap is an act of supreme cosmic mercy, an architectural flaw in the prison of determinism that ensures no human soul can ever be truly enslaved unless it actively participates in its own captivity. To explore this hidden landscape requires us to develop a completely different kind of sensory apparatus, a subtle form of internal sight that can measure the difference between a neural firing and a spiritual choice. We must learn to slow down our perception of our internal world, expanding those tiny, laboratory measured milliseconds into vast, spacious valleys of contemplative awareness. As we prepare to dissect the mechanics of this sacred interval, we are not merely studying a quirk of human psychology. We are uncovering the hidden machinery of human sovereignty. We are investigating how the soul communicates its consent, how the modern world conspires to bypass this protective buffer, and how we can consciously widen this 2-second clearing into a wide, luminous highway of spiritual awakening. It is an invitation to stop living as the passive passenger of your neurochemistry and step into your true role as the divine arbiter of your destiny, standing watch at the grand gates where the brain proposes, but the soul disposes. To grasp the full magnitude of this temporal sanctuary, we must first examine the foundational mechanics of the biological brain as an evolutionary projection device. The human brain is, at its core, a magnificent machine of survival built upon layers of historical conditioning, genetic memory, and sensory programming. It does not perceive reality as it truly is. Instead, it creates a highly efficient, simplified simulation of the world based on past experiences. This process is driven by what neuroscience terms predictive processing, where the brain actively anticipates incoming data and pre-renders its responses to conserve metabolic energy. When you encounter a situation in your daily life, your neurochemistry instantly pulls up an established file from its vast archive of survival strategies, preparing a physical reflex before you have even fully registered the event. This automated generation of intent is the brain's decision, a mechanical, hyper-fast calculation that runs on the dense tracks of cause and effect. It is a closed loop of biological karma, where the past dictates the immediate future with uncompromising momentum, standing in direct contrast to this mechanical speed is the vast, non-linear reality of the soul's permission. While the brain operates within the strict, forward-marching ticks of linear time, the soul exists in a state of spacious, non-local presence. It is the field of silent awareness that witnesses the brain's internal calculations without being consumed by them. The 2-second gap is the literal bridge between these two distinct dimensions of existence, the point where the horizontal line of biological time is intersected by the vertical line of eternal consciousness. In this brief, laboratory-verified interval, the momentum of the material world is forced to yield to a higher authority. The soul does not struggle against the brain's pre-rendered impulses. It simply envelopes them in a spacious field of observation. This field acts as a metaphysical veto power, a cosmic quality control checkpoint where the spirit decides whether a proposed action aligns with its higher evolutionary purpose, or merely repeats the ancient cyclical patterns of animal survival. The modern crisis of human consciousness lies precisely in the active, systematic erosion of this protective buffer zone. We live in a hyper-stimulated culture whose economic and technological architectures are explicitly engineered to bypass the soul's permission. Every algorithmic notification, every short-form video, every outrage-inducing headline, and every weaponized marketing strategy is designed to trigger the brain's immediate, primitive reflexes at a speed that completely obliterates the 2-second interval. When you react instantly to a digital provocation, pull a habit-forming device from your pocket without thinking, or succumb to a conditioned craving, your awareness has been successfully trapped on the horizontal line of biological reflex. The simulation of modern life forces the brain to render choices so rapidly that the conscious mind becomes a mere rubber stamp, automatically validating the machine's programming. This state of constant reactivity is the definition of spiritual sleep, a condition where the soul is effectively locked out of the biological vehicle, leaving the organism to run entirely on the automated tracks of its conditioning. Reclaiming the gap requires an understanding of the theme of spiritual friction, the deliberate introduction of conscious weight into the gears of our automated psychology. In a perfectly frictionless system, the brain's decision translates into physical action instantly, leaving no room for the intervention of spirit. However, when we cultivate internal observation, we introduce a beneficial friction into our cognitive biology. This friction manifests as a subtle, spacious pause right at the moment an impulse arises. It is the realization that you do not have to obey the chemistry of your own thoughts. When a wave of irritation, anxiety, or compulsion fires through your nervous system, that sensation is not an absolute command. It is merely an energetic proposal submitted by the animal vessel. By refusing to immediately identify with the impulse, you stretch the micro-mammaliness of neural processing into a vast, luminous valley of choice, giving the soul the necessary room to step forward, assess the situation from a higher dimensional perspective, and withdraw its consent from the automated script. This conceptual framework fundamentally transforms our understanding of karma and personal destiny. Karma is not a mystical ledger of cosmic rewards and punishments kept by an external deity. It is the simple, mechanical momentum of unvetted biological loops. Every time you allow your brain's automated decisions to pass into reality without seeking the soul's permission, you reinforce the neural pathways of your past, ensuring that your tomorrow will be an exact duplicate of your yesterday. True destiny, conversely, is forged entirely within the sacred boundaries of the 2-second gap. The moment you utilize the interval to veto a conditioned reflex, you break a link in the chain of ancestral cause and effect. You introduce a genuine anomaly into the matrix of your life. A choice that could not have been predicted by your genetics, your upbringing, or your environment. This is the ultimate meaning of spiritual science, the utilization of a natural, chronological buffer to continuously inject the unmanifest light of the soul into the dense, pre-programmed theater of human matter, to illuminate the subtle alchemy that takes place within this invisible interval. Let us journey into an old, forgotten allegory preserved within the mystical schools of the high desert. Imagine a vast, magnificent palace situated at the boundary between two worlds, known to its keepers as the Citadel of the Amber Seal. This fortress belongs to a young, noble king who has inherited an empire of unimaginable wealth and complexity. Yet, by ancient law, the king does not sit upon the front steps to greet the world. He resides in an inner chamber of absolute silence, carved from a single block of dark, reflective obsidian. He communicates with the outer realm exclusively through his Grand Vizier, a brilliant, hyperactive administrator whose mind can calculate 10,000 logistics at once. The Vizier stands at the palace gates, facing a chaotic, never-ending procession of foreign ambassadors, merchant caravans, and provincial petitioners who demand immediate resources, treaties, and declarations from the crown. The Vizier is an exquisite creation of logic and strategy. He possesses a massive library of leather-bound ledgers containing every historical decree, every past war, and every economic precedent of the kingdom. When an ambassador arrives with an urgent demand, the Vizier does not waste time deliberating. His fingers fly across his ledgers, instantly retrieving the traditional response that has always been given to such a request. He dips his quill in ink, drafts a royal decree with lightning speed, and prepares to press the great seal upon the wax to finalize the law. But the palace operates under a peculiar structural constraint. The Vizier's desk is connected to the king's distant, silent chamber by a long, hollow tube of polished bronze. Between the moment the Vizier finishes writing his automated decree and the moment he is permitted to strike the wax with the seal, a heavy bronze ball drops into the tube, taking exactly 2 seconds to roll down the long, winding conduit into the king's hand. During those 2 seconds, a profound transaction occurs. In the absolute quiet of the obsidian room, the king catches the bronze ball and listens. He does not read the Vizier's massive ledgers, nor does he listen to the frantic shouting of the foreign ambassadors at the gate. Instead, he holds the ball to his ear, sensing the vibrational echo of the Vizier's intent through the metal. He evaluates whether this automated, historical response aligns with the timeless, unwritten constitution of the spiritual realm. If the king remains silent, the ball drops through a floor grate, completing the circuit. The Vizier interprets this absence of objection as royal assent, strikes the seal, and the mechanical history of the kingdom marches forward on its predictable path. But if the king hears a note of corruption, fear, or ancient prejudice in the echo, he strikes a massive silver gong in his room. The sound waves travel up the tube, freezing the vizier's arm mid-strike and shattering the wax before it can touch the paper. The decree is vetoed, the old law is broken, and the gates are cleared for a brand new destiny. There is another narrative, whispered among the celestial sailors who mapped the internal currents of the human spirit. They spoke of the ghost ship, a massive galleon made of weathered oak that has been sailing an infinite mist-shrouded ocean for hundreds of years. The ship is manned by a crew of skeletal sailors who represent the deep ancestral habits of the biological vessel. They know exactly how to trim the sails when the storm hits, how to navigate by the old dead stars of past trauma, and how to steer the ship away from uncharted waters out of an ancient ingrained fear of the deep. The wheel of the galleon is massive, turned by the collective weight of these skeletal mariners who constantly steer the vessel toward the same dark, familiar ports where the crew can indulge in the same predictable vices and repetitive miseries. However, the ship possesses a true captain, a radiant, immortal being of pure light who lives at the top of the highest mast, in a crow's nest that sits entirely above the swirling fog of the material ocean. The captain can see the entire globe, recognizing that the ports the crew is steering toward are infested with rocks and ruins, while just beyond the horizon lie golden, sunlit islands of absolute freedom. The captain does not wrestle with the skeletal crew for physical control of the wheel. The immortal spirit cannot touch the heavy, dense oak of the material world directly. Instead, a magical tether connects the captain's hand to the ship's rudder. Every time the skeletal crew throws their collective weight against the wheel to make a sharp, automated turn based on their ancient maps, the tether absorbs the kinetic energy, delaying the movement of the rudder by a single, profound breath. In that brief delay, the fog around the rudder clears, and the captain is granted an interval of absolute veto power. If the captain is distracted, looking down at the mist or daydreaming about old voyages, the rudder snaps into alignment with the crew's frantic commands, and the ship crashes into the same old rocks of daily misery. But if the captain remains alert, standing tall against the wind, the immortal spirit can send a current of pure, energetic will down the tether during that sacred hesitation. This current freezes the rudder in place, rendering the immense muscular effort of the skeletal crew completely useless. The ship continues straight, cutting clean through the old fog, defying the ancient maps of the ancestors, and charting a course toward an entirely new world that none of the sailors believed could exist, bringing the majesty of the citadel's gong or the captain's tether into the concrete arena of the modern world requires us to completely re-engineer our relationship with our own immediate internal architecture, we must recognize that the 2-second gap is not a passive luxury that expands on its own. It is a highly volatile, deeply sought-after piece of psychic real estate that is constantly under siege by the hyper-accelerated nature of modern existence. To live an integrated life is to deliberately step off the treadmill of immediate, automated reactions and become a conscious practitioner of the spiritual pause. This process does not require you to change the external structures of your life, your career, or your daily obligations. Instead, it demands that you change the internal speed limits of your perception, training your consciousness to run slightly slower than the biological machinery that surrounds it. The primary battlefield for this integration is found within the domestic and professional spaces where our conditioning is most deeply entrenched. Consider the moment you receive a sharp, critical text message or an email that triggers an immediate wave of defensiveness or anger throughout your nervous system. In that flash of irritation, your biological brain has already made its decision. Its evolutionary programming has instantly pre-rendered a sharp, biting retort designed to protect the fragile boundaries of the ego. Your fingers hover over the keyboard, ready to execute the machine's command. This is the precise location of the cosmic checkpoint. If you strike the keys immediately, you have allowed the brain to rubber stamp its past conditioning, reinforcing a loop of conflict that will ripple out into your future. But if you train yourself to recognize the physical sensation of that neural firing, the tightening of the chest, the flash of heat in the neck as the arrival of the vizier's proposal, you can consciously invoke the amber seal. You do this by enforcing a literal, physical boundary that mirrors the metaphysical gap. You drop your hands from the keyboard, close your eyes, and slowly count to 3. During those 3 seconds, you are not trying to suppress the anger, nor are you attempting to rationalize it away with intellectual arguments. Instead, you are simply stepping into the obsidian chamber of the observing king. You watch the chemical storm of the brain's decision rage through your body without allowing it to touch your identity. You hold the impulse up to the light of your highest spiritual values, asking yourself a single, profound question. Does this automated reaction serve the expansion of my soul? Or does it merely repeat the ancient, ancestral script of survival? By the time you open your eyes, the initial chemical spike of the neurochemistry has already begun to dissolve, and you find that the soul has quietly withheld its permission. You are now free to write a response that originates from a place of absolute clarity, completely shattering the cycle of predictable cause and effect. This practice is equally transformative when applied to our deepest, most stubborn personal habits and compulsive behaviors. Whether it is the automatic reaching for a phone during a moment of boredom, the subconscious grazing through the refrigerator for comfort food, or the repetitive cycle of negative self-talk. These behaviors are all driven by the brain's hyper-fast predictive processing. They happen so quickly because the pathways have been worn deep into the neural landscape through years of unvetted repetition. To break these loops, you must introduce conscious weight right at the inception of the urge. When the temptation arises, instead of fighting the desire with brute willpower, which is an exhausting strategy that rarely succeeds, you simply claim your 2 seconds of absolute veto power. You say to yourself, out loud or in the silence of your mind, "My brain has proposed this action, but my soul has not yet granted permission." This simple phrase acts as a psychological circuit breaker, immediately splitting your identity away from your neurochemistry and restoring your status as the sovereign arbiter of your body. Ultimately, the real-world implication of mastering this hidden interval is the attainment of a profound, unshakable peace that the external world can neither give nor take away. When you know that there is a protective buffer zone between what happens to you and how you choose to manifest in response, you lose your fear of external circumstances. You no longer see yourself as a fragile leaf blown about by the chaotic winds of economic shifts, social political upheavals, or the unpredictable moods of the people around you. You realize that the entire external universe, with all its noise and bright lights, is merely a magnificent, complex petitioner standing at the gates of your palace, holding out its proposals for your review. You are the king in the obsidian room, the captain at the top of the highest mast, the silent witness who holds the ultimate power of absolute refusal. By stepping into the gap every single day, you systematically dismantle the mechanical prison of your past, ensuring that your life becomes a continuous, beautiful unfolding of original, divinely permitted choices. We have arrived at the ultimate threshold of our journey, a quiet and solemn space where the abstract mechanics of neuroscience and the timeless whispers of esotericism melt away into a single radiant truth. We have spent our lives believing that the great drama of human existence is fought across the vast, illuminated stages of the external world, in the careers we build, the battles we wage, and the grand choices that reshape our outer circumstances. But as we pull back our attention from the blinding glare of the matrix, we discover that the true pivot point of human destiny is housed within a sanctuary so small, so intimate, that the hurried eye of modern civilization can never even see it. Your entire spiritual evolution, your liberation from the cycles of historical trauma, and your birthright as a divine sovereign do not wait for you at the end of a long, arduous path of future achievements. They are fully present, fully alive, and completely available to you inside the quiet, 2-second gap that sits between every single thought and every single action you take. To live in awareness of this gap is to accept a profound and beautiful responsibility. It means waking up to the realization that you can no longer blame your biology, your ancestors, your upbringing, or the chaotic state of the world for the reality you are currently experiencing. Your biological brain, conditioned by the dense rules of the material plane, will continue to propose the old ways of being. It will continue to offer you files of fear, reactivity, defensive anger, and compulsive desire, because that is what it was engineered to do, to ensure your animal survival. But the brain is not the master of the house. It is merely the vizier at the gate. The moment you step into the sacred interval, you reclaim your seat as the rightful monarch. You acknowledge that nothing can cross the threshold into your physical reality unless your immortal soul explicitly grants its royal permission. You are the final filter, the divine checkpoint, the ultimate arbiter who decides which aspects of the past are allowed to inherit the beauty of the future. Let this understanding become an invisible, luminous mantle that you wear into every room you enter, every conversation you hold, and every challenge you face. When the world demands your immediate reaction, when the algorithms of modern life attempt to pull you onto the frantic, horizontal tracks of mechanical cause and effect, remember the citadel of the amber seal. Remember that you have a bronze ball rolling down the tube, giving you a safe, unalterable cushion of absolute freedom. Stand tall in that temporary vacuum. Breathe deeply into the spaciousness of your own observing spirit, and let the frantic proposals of the matrix dissolve against the unyielding stillness of your presence. You do not need to fight your conditioning, nor do you need to wage a violent war against the habits of your past. You simply need to withhold your consent during the interval of grace, allowing the old scripts to shatter on their own for lack of divine fuel. The cosmic architecture has provided you with an escape hatch from the prison of determinism, an exquisite flaw in the computational fabric of reality that ensures you can never be truly enslaved by your neurochemistry. The captain is standing in the crow's nest. The king is alert in the obsidian chamber. And the tether of pure intention is resting quietly in your hand. The universe is holding its breath, waiting to see what you will choose to do with the next 2 seconds of your life. Step out of the mechanical dream of action and reaction. Claim the sacred pause that has belonged to you since before the stars were born, and begin the magnificent work of rendering a life that is truly, beautifully, and divinely permitted.